As a leadership team, what are the few critical decisions we must make better and faster in the next 12 to 18 months? And how can AI serve not as an intern, but as a genuine thinking partner? This is the question of the week that I asked James O'Donovan and Ian Miell. In the following video, we will discuss why more data and more dashboards is somehow producing slower decisions. We'll discuss the cephalopod problem, and this is what happens when intelligent leaders are unfortunately lacking backbone. And finally, you will discover Jamie's vanilla ice rule, which helps all of our customers and potentially you to make the following next sensible steps. Enjoy the video. Now guys, as a leadership team, there are critical decisions that I know for sure you can make better and faster in the next 12 to 18 months. And my main question to you is this: how can AI serve not as a replacement or as an intern, but as an actual thinking partner for you in your day-to-day jobs to improve your judgment and specific decisions?
Well, let me kick off on that one, Jamie. I think there's two aspects to this. So we can take we can take container solutions. So we're a professional services business. We're quite small. We have to make lots of small decisions, and those have to be quick decisions. But also, because we're trying to grow and we're trying to sort of work out what our next phase looks like, sometimes AI and the ability to make quicker decisions and get things done fast can actually be a bit of a problem. So when I'm trying to sort of create something, say for a board meeting, or to look at our sort of next phase of growth, the time that takes and the thinking time to go through that process properly is counter to what AI might do for me, which is accelerate a bunch of information or force on me a time frame that's probably too short. So I get value from taking time to go through a process. Now, obviously, our customers are all significantly larger than us and have much larger teams to sort of get decisions out of, and that's where AI can make a huge contribution to enable those teams to generate output, to generate information, reports, analysis at a much faster clip. And
it sounds to me, James, that you've got a red line around creativity. If something requires time, as if you were making a casserole or a soup, you have to let it bubble and boil. It sounds to me you've got a distinct use case where AI shouldn't be used.
Yeah, I think that the human brain is still holds pole position when it comes to intelligence, right? So allowing the human brain for most human brains.
I'm not so sure.
But I think there's a lot of nuance when you're trying to make a certain decision. There are a number of factors, and I think it's important that when you are running a business in whatever capacity, that you allow yourself to go through that process.
I think it's important to note that your output, Jod, is not simply text.
Yeah.
Your output is your ability to respond to people's questions, whether they're investors, whether they're staff, whether they're management teams, about the decisions you've made. So if you turn around and said, this is the decision I've made, and they asked you a question, you went, hang on a sec, let me just look at
Let me check my model.
Yeah, let me check what ChatGPT thinks. They would be distinctly unimpressed, because you are accountable,
right.
Highly accountable for your decisions.
But that's not to say that I will not use the output from others that may have come via those models, because there are elements of my decision that will lean on stuff that others have created, either through models or through their own thinking.
And your judgment is about whether you trust what they're giving you is thought through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about the process, James, before you get to your decision and your gestation? And I'm not sure how you do it. I do a lot of walking, as you've seen from my ridiculous LinkedIn videos. Before you get to your decision, when you're crunching information, do you find generative AI useful in preparation before you enter into this reflective phase and this decision-making phase?
It depends where your information is coming from. So if my information is coming from my team, could be a set of financials, could be a cash flow forecast. That cash flow forecast might have been built using an AI tool, or certainly the fabric of how it's been built might be. So you've got to bring it all you've got to bring it all together. You can't. There's no one bit that you'd say that's what I use Gen AI for. Sometimes it's just going for a swim and having a good half an hour think on one topic, and you might come to 4 or 5 different conclusions during that half an hour, and that can be more valuable than any tooling.
When I spoke to Barry O'Reilly, I shared with him part of my writing process, which is once I've got a rough draft, I've got a number of specific words that I default to. I use them when I'm speaking. You can't listen to me use those same words in a book. You can't read that. It would be awful. I've got a number of words and I've got a number of phrases and specific adjectives and adverbs. And when I've done a first draft, I go through my words and I use Google Docs to find each one and I look at that sentence. Now, I can now use Claude. I can give Claude my list of words and say, analyse that text for me. It's probably made that bit 1,000 times, maybe 10,000 times faster. But unfortunately, it shortens a 5-hour process into an hour process. So I've saved 4 hours. But writing the chapter takes me about 4 months if it's a biggie. And so if you look at that specific task, I'm massively more productive, but it doesn't do much from the moment I sit down at my keyboard to the moment I hand that draft to an editor. And I'm guessing there must be things like that in your world that are hyper optimized, but actually they don't do much to the overall process.
Yeah, you see, I don't create a lot. A lot of my time invested is thinking, is talking to people, is solving a problem, it's talking to an investor about a couple of acquisitions. It could be about the pipeline, it could be bringing the team together to go through. So I think if I was, let's say we were a bigger business and our job was to sort of be a little bit more public facing with some of our information and our market views, and I think I could definitely see the use for that. In my job, I'm providing quite standardized, simplistic reporting into investors or shareholders, and that stuff does tend to be quite mechanical.
Is it possible that AI could actually change a simple task? It sounds like you've got your process down pat, and if you started using AI now, you'll produce worse data, less digestible for the stakeholders around you.
Well, I think it's back to the point Ian made and the point I made at the start, is it would give me less time to do it. I would spend less time doing it, in which case I wouldn't think as much about what I'm writing. Because when I'm writing, I'm writing a board report or a paper for our investors, the time it takes is also thinking time. And I value that. Maybe I'm a bit old school. Maybe I was 20, 30 years younger.
I think that's because you have to be prepared for the questions. So it needs to be in your brain rather than a chunk of text that you read out to someone.
Yeah. I mean, an opinion will be thought out by me with my own set of assumptions and, whatever it might be. So I'd like to think there's value in that.
One of the reasons I like podcasting is because it proves to my readers that I'm not using ChatGPT. Because when I can produce answers dead quick, it's like I've been tested. It's like defending your PhD thesis, Ian.
I was just reminded of something else, actually. Jeff Bezos once said that one of the most important...
It's Bezos.
Jeff Bezos said, I think once, that the most important thing he did as a manager was get 8 hours sleep. Because he might make one decision a day. And if he makes that decision when he's tired or grumpy or fed up or whatever, exuberant, it could have massive consequences. So is there a thing about consequences here that if I'm an engineer and I write a piece of code and it takes 1 millisecond to run, and I get ChatGPT to create a piece of code and it takes 2 milliseconds to run, only in very rare situations does that actually have any consequence. So it's fine to just use ChatGPT and sub it in.
Yeah,
but it's funny you should say that, Ian, because of course, controversially, with the conflict in Iran right now, the US, or at least there is chatter about decisions are being made using artificial intelligence. And of course, on the first day of the conflict, a school was blown up. And what people are saying is, has that decision been made too fast without thinking through the potential consequences? That is shocking. So if it sounds terrible, if it's £1 million, that's bad enough, especially for a small company, but it's nowhere near as bad as the loss of human life.
But intelligence has always been flawed, right? So this is.
But it's been accountable to a person.
Yeah, okay.
But I think there is a danger. This idea that we must move fast and break things. Obviously, when we say breaking things, we don't mean people's lives. I personally think, and I like fast decision making. My whole management career has been focused on fast decision making. But I think there's an element when if you go too quick, there are going to be consequences. Some things can't be unrolled, right? There are certain decisions, they're one-way doors. You go through them, you cannot come back again.
But Jod's right. Like, we had friendly fire before AI. We had mistakes in war. These things happen. I think what people are finding shocking is the idea, and I don't know what the reality is in this particular case, but the idea that a decision could have been made and everyone just shrugs their shoulders and goes, well, not our fault, it's the AI that's said it.
But I mean, still, whoever is sat at the top of that particular piece of activity, they are still responsible. And they've chosen to, well, they are. I mean, whether they actually put their hand up and say they are, is different. But fundamentally, if you're head of the armed forces and you've made a lethal decision based on a tool.
This is like the self-driving car thing, isn't it? Self-driving cars are safer, right, in the average.
Yeah.
But we don't want to use them, or we're not comfortable using them because no one is responsible then if something goes wrong, or the AI is responsible, right? Yeah. And you can't say the CEO of the AI model producing company is responsible because they won't have been. So kind of no one is responsible. And then how do you handle that?
Well, exactly. But the entrepreneurial manager always sees reward in the future and want to go as quick as possible. I think the problem with the use of AI in a war zone is, could that decision be avoided? So yes, there are things happened. I think people are asking, well, if that decision had have gestated over a longer period, would a human have spotted that there was a school next to that compound, and would they have done something about it? So I don't think it's about mistakes happen without computers, but if it goes so quickly and there isn't a governance around it, and this absolutely has implications for our customers, if there isn't a governance layer around that decision making, then maybe sometimes it's too quick for our own good.
That goes, I mean, again, it goes back to what Ian and I were talking about at the start of this podcast, which was AI tools are really important in business, but I still need time to walk through the output of those tools to understand what the right decision is. So as someone who is somewhat responsible and accountable, I need to be investing time to almost slow down that process and take those outputs and make sure that I'm comfortable with those decisions and what the output is, Ian.
Yeah, so actually, I saw a story yesterday, which I forwarded to someone I know in AWS, about AWS. So an AI recently, I don't know if it brought down a data center or something, but it did something obviously wrong. And so AWS instituted this rule that someone senior has to sign off any change by an AI in future, right? And I put this to my colleague, my former colleague at AWS, and he said, yeah, but notice we're not saying don't use AI. We're saying, okay, we've learned our lesson now. There's this rule, but it's interesting that the same governance processes are now re-emerging. Someone's got to be responsible. Someone's got to say it's okay.
You can't get rid of that, can you? Now, guys, I'm going to switch gears and do a complete flipper-doodle-doo now. A flipper-doodle-doo is, by the way, when I reverse everything. What is one of the biggest challenges for chief executives in any company, because with board of directors, management teams, it's feeling psychologically safe to explore ideas, test scenarios, and learn without panicking. Now, we work in a pretty psychologically safe company, but most people don't. What do you think of this idea of a chief executive having an AI tool or a gang of AIs that can help them to think? I nearly said help him to think, it's nearly always a him, who can help the CEO to think in a safe space to test their ideas without putting themselves in the firing line for extra criticism. Is there any merit in that idea?
I can talk from a technical point of view to that a little bit, but maybe that's not where we want to go with this. But just quickly, like there's been a constant idea of having multiple agents fulfilling different roles and modeling those roles to you. My experience of that, using that for software, has been that that's been of quite limited use.
I would hope that the team around me would be able to identify the best use cases and the best ways to embrace elements of AI.
Yeah.
And we would talk that through as a team and understand the bits where we thought we could add real value or where we could accelerate proposal generation or writing papers or whatever it might be.
Sorry, Jamie, I thought you were talking about using AI to model different people in your business.
One of the challenges is for chief executives is it's hard to operate in a safe space because you don't want to look foolish in front of your board, in front of your own people. Now, I'm not saying that's right.
If you don't look foolish, don't take the job.
Well, exactly. But unfortunately, many people are really afraid of looking foolish. So when I spoke to Barry O'Reilly, the author of Artificial Organizations, he suggested this idea that an AI tool could provide that safety for a chief exec or senior leader to explore different ideas. Of course, my response was, well, he should just get a different job, or his job or her job is to build a psychologically safe team in which they can operate. But assuming that that's practically possible, are there any merits in using these tools as sidekicks to, for example, generate different scenarios for a future strategy?
Or sort of
testing them out, as it were, with the system.
Brain augmentation to give yourself extra IQ, plugged in IQ.
Definitely used ChatGPT as a thinking partner, and I've observed my wife using it as a thinking partner. And it's also worth pointing out that one of the biggest use cases for Gen AI at the moment is, in fact, I think it is the most popular use case is cheap psychotherapy or cheap coaching.
Really?
Yeah, people really use it to make decisions about their lives or ruminate on things they want to ruminate on.
And why is that? Because they don't have someone that they can turn to in real life, or they feel they're going to get a more accurate set of feedback?
I don't know, but I think it's the availability of it. It's a bit like Google. If the information,
always awake.
Yeah, it's always there. It's private. It's pretty private, hopefully.
I've got a different hypothesis here. So first of all, the reason why I think it's dangerous for a chief executive to work with an LLM is because they're all trained to be polite. Now, in my multiple roles in my life, I've worked with therapists, I've worked with coaches, sports coaches, business coaches, and what you get is extremely confrontational feedback at the right moment. ChatGPT doesn't do that. ChatGPT would say to me, "You're doing great with your podcast. It doesn't matter that there was only 2 people watching. These things take time to grow," when sometimes you need a slap around the head. So I think the danger with AI in a psychotherapy capacity is the same danger an executive would have asking it for coaching. Because sometimes one of the biggest problems, so talking about horror stories, Ian, what is one of the singular biggest problems that you and I observe on our travels? It's executives that are surrounded by people who are sycophants. Nobody holds up the mirror. Every now and then you have to hold up the mirror, or I have to hold up the mirror, and then we get a slap around the head. That number one problem, self-awareness, and nobody giving direct input to them. I don't think an LLM will do that right now. Somebody needs to design one that, kicks ass. Choose bubblegum.
Again, it's not,
and kicks ass.
But it's, again, that's a problem both with AI and the real world.
I was going to say, if you don't build a good team around you, you've got a bunch of yes men or yes women, I guess, and that's not a good position to be in.
Yeah.
Well, there's no. I mean, how many? I mean, let's not bring up examples, but I mean, I've sat with you, Ian, several times, and I've gone, I think X, Y, and Z, and you've gone, no, I don't agree with that. I don't see it that way. But, if I'd used ChatGPT for that conversation,
But if you can have yes men and women if you're aware of their biases in the context of your team, right? So if everyone around you is a yes person, then you're in trouble. But you can still use a yes person or a ChatGPT for specific purposes or specific.
A good team has to have a balance, right? You got to have the two people that you know are a natural adjutant.
Maybe this is heading to agentic AI. You need to build a team of different agents with different character traits and biases, and then
That's what I was
maybe
saying earlier. Doesn't I found that doesn't really work. It degenerates very
yeah.
quickly.
I find this to be an interesting conclusion that we're heading towards then. We are all experienced in using these tools, not just in our day-to-day work, but as a company. I would say we're pretty much, are we on the bleeding edge, Ian? At least the cutting edge?
Well, I think it's varied. I think it's fair to say that James here doesn't use it as much as our engineers do. And our I don't know if I'm revealing a confidence here, but our CFO has been experimenting with using AI tools and is very nervous about it. It's very
Yeah.
uncomfortable with it because
Mm.
I suspect because
Lack of
that
control.
well that I think that career that field hasn't fully absorbed the possibilities of this yet, whereas
Yeah.
engineers have been
Yeah.
doing this for 2 or 3 years. So we've got over the. You can see real kind of not terror. Terror is the wrong word, but a shift,
Anxiety. Yeah.
anxiety.
Well, but I think finance teams at scale, I think are. I mean, we sat in a briefing about a year ago at PricewaterhouseCoopers, or sorry, PwC as it's now called, and
Well, we
there
don't
are
work
things-
for them. You can call them what you like.
but I mean, a lot of their use cases are in sort of the back end efficiencies in finance.
Mm.
I think in a very large distributed finance team, I think there's significant value in embracing AI and AI
Well,
tools.
I think for everyone, but
Yeah,
I think it's going to be more felt there more quickly because the economies of
Yeah.
scale are going to speak for themselves, and
Yeah.
investment's going to happen quickly.
yeah.
My-
And I think at the
There's-
opposite end of the scale, sorry, Jamie, where you've got a very, very, very small finance team, which we do, then obviously the use of AI is a bit different because you can create stuff faster because you haven't got 3 team members to help you do that task.
And,
So
and,
the value's different.
and as an engineer, I remember worrying when I started my job that when I automated something, I'd be out of a job. And that was a real fear I had. And I think I see the same fear in some financial people.
Yeah.
But I've had 30 years to get over that fear and embrace it because actually you get given more.
Finance teams for years, and the ones that I've worked closely with, have always been bitter about the fact that way too much of the month is spent closing the prior month, and they're not spending enough time doing the stuff to help the business move forward. So I think the reality is that this can only be a good thing for finance teams as they spend less time
yeah.
knife and forking the previous month's closure, and actually they can sit with other members of the team and actually help make better decisions.
Or will they move from physical bookkeeping in books to Excel spreadsheets, and now Excel spreadsheets to something else that feels laborious?
Well, and as we learned yesterday, there are some very big businesses that still use spreadsheets as their core of their finance system.
I think for me, we've been poking this for a few years now. The next 18 months, I think the main use cases for large language models or for AI systems, generative AI systems, is around information summarizing. So if you're doing questionnaires about products and you need to summarize them quickly, then they can help. If you've done a survey, an employment survey, what are you happy with? What do you want to change? You can identify trends. But I honestly, it still requires, based on the trends, a decision to be made, and that requires time and it requires backbone. I've been talking about cephalopod leadership. Have you heard about this from me yet, Ian? Cephalopod leadership. The challenges we see with leaders and managers isn't around intelligence. They're usually highly intelligent, but like an octopus or a cephalopod, they're highly intelligent but lacking backbone. And then the question is, how could a generative tool provide the managerial courage that a lot of people need, or the safety in which it is, less courage is required? I personally don't think I don't see a future where most of the work of management is outsourced to a computer program. I just don't see it. Maybe I'll be proven wrong.
Back to what I said at the start. I think it's imperative that leaders, managers, anyone that's responsible for others has that sort of natural human intelligence put over the top of any tooling, because then the trust is that person can understand the different inputs and
This is
come up with the right.
cybernetics, isn't it? This is the original idea of cybernetics. Cybernetics was always about the combination of man and machine. Then they would have said man and machine. Now we say person and machine. And that combination being greater than the sum of the parts, right? And how do you do that?
Surely this has forever been. I mean, you go back to computers, you go back to the internet, you go back to cloud. This is just AI is just the next technology chapter, right?
Yeah, I mean, how did they build the pyramids? They had to have management structures and accountants. Accountants built the pyramids.
I read something that would definitely categorize as an absolute horror story, not for the customer and not for the end user, but the Wall Street Journal. And the Wall Street Journal, by the way, have got a brilliant team that write about artificial intelligence and technology. It turns out that a company called Carbonet, ran by Chief Operating Officer Bill Schonbrun, that sounds Dutch, must have ancestry, Mr. Bill Schonbrun, was implementing Salesforce, and they realised that Salesforce was not fit for purpose. Now, I don't know how much it was going to cost in terms of configuring or bringing in a consultancy to do this for them. They vibe coded a solution. Now, this is not a small company. This is a big company. What the hell does this mean for Salesforce and software tool providers who have something generic? And we all know that generic software is easy to sell, license. What does it mean when that gets interrupted? This sounds like a horror story for them unfolding before our very eyes.
This is the narrative that's going around the investment world, right? Salesforce is toast because people are vibe coding solutions. But I'm getting a sense of deja vu here, which is when I started in the industry, there were all basically we're going in a big circle, right? So now you've got Salesforce and someone says, hey, I can vibe code something. And 20 other people say I can vibe code something. And then you've got this complete mess. There will be a complete mess because there'll be different databases, or maybe they're talking the same data. I don't know, but there'll be some sort of mess, and eventually someone will say, well, we need something to tie all this together, so we need to hire a consultancy to come in and figure out with their clever AI tools or whatever how to make this into one thing.
Is this not the same mistake that cloud made 15
Yeah,
years
I'm
ago?
sure we saw the same.
Well,
any new technology.
It goes back further. Steve Freeman, a friend of mine, was writing on LinkedIn the other week about Excel. And so Excel arrived, and then so too did Visual Basic. So people like you and I, or James and Kate in our finance team, could hack together solutions, which they did. It's like, wow, I've been able to close the books quicker. But one hack became another. There was no source control, there was no testing. And so these scripts spread like a weed until eventually a consultancy was brought in to clean it all up, and then another company productized the whole thing and sold the product back to the company. It would have been much cheaper and more effective to have done it right from the very start. And what Steve's saying is what we saw in the 1980s is about to happen again, with all of these companies vibe coding their way into bespoke solutions that just won't scale and just are just not versioned properly.
That was my first job in the industry, was writing Lotus 123 macros.
What do you say,
then,
vibe coding?
well, yeah, I mean hacking.
Yeah.
I bought a book on Visual Basic as well. I remember £50 it cost me, absolute fortune then, and I remember sort of desperately reading it before I went into the office, and that's how I got started. And there's engineers today who are vibe coding stuff, and they will learn, and they will learn the lessons of what they're doing if they're smart, and eventually, become the engineers of tomorrow. They'll be AI native.
Yeah.
Now you've teed me up, Ian. You've teed me up because in this section of the podcast, we talk about horror stories. We started by talking about a potential horror story for Salesforce, but what about our customers? Are they about to make that fatal mistake as well? Are they going to vibe code their way into the cloud, into some Terraform scripts, and will they have to call us in 6 months and end up spending more money on companies like ours fixing that stuff? And if they are going to do that, how can we stop them doing that?
I've got a slightly different angle on this, which I'm sure Ian will come with his angle after. I think not necessarily with our customers, that is in our customer base, but I think across businesses worldwide, investments have been made in AI, which are sat on top of previous investments that aren't necessarily done properly. So, as I said before, we've gone through sort of the age of the computer, and then the internet came along, which connected the computers, and then you come up with the cloud, which is kind of centralized infrastructure, and now AI sits across that and can think for us. Companies that haven't necessarily embraced cloud in the way that maybe they should have, or they've done part of the journey, or they haven't completed the transformation, and now investing in AI because shareholder pressure, peer pressure, keeping up with Jones Limited. That means that suddenly they're not necessarily getting the value out of the use case that they thought they had, which they presented to the board. And we know that our customers are bringing us in to help solve some of their problems with their platforms, so that not necessarily so they can leverage the value of the AI use case, but it's certainly shone a microscope onto, hey, we're not quite set up as we should be here. We thought we'd done cloud when we probably haven't quite done cloud. We now need to sort of review that so we can move forward with gusto.
I agree completely. We're already seeing the signs of companies coming to us, and while we help them with other cloud, with other platform challenges, and then realizing that it's that our data platform isn't correct, or our teams aren't talking to each other, and we need to integrate them together. And it's the same pattern we saw with cloud. They get started on their own, and then they realize they need to do this in a more thoughtful way.
What is our advice? Is it the vanilla ice advice?
What's the vanilla ice advice, Jamie?
Stop, collaborate, and listen.
Stop.
I'm not actually joking.
Stop, collaborate, and reach out to Container Solutions.
Joking aside, we've been doing this. So why do people love Container Solutions? The amount of times I've gone into a meeting and said, stop what you're doing. Just stop and think for a second. Let's talk. Is this what we need to do? Do people just need to stop and say, take a breath and take stock of where they actually are? Because that's what I find is people start with the vision of the future and then get confronted with their ugly reality. Professional strategists start with an understanding of their reality, and from that point, plot the future path. Is that our stock advice now? Think carefully.
A little bit. I think there's a budget conversation, right? I think there's businesses that do a very good job of this stuff, right? So you can't generalize, but I think there's a lot of businesses out there that have redirected budget to AI without understanding that there are actually material budget shortfalls in the bit they never finished. So stopping is a lot. I mean, companies won't stop because they'll be under pressure and they won't have the bravery to stop. But I think understanding the investments that have to be made to deliver the outcomes that they feel they should be getting from AI isn't always about investing in AI. And I think a lot of that budget that has been shifted into AI, actually, it never really was AI budget. A lot of that needs to be, internally rebadged as actually we need to go and fix the data pipelines. We need to go and fix. We do need to refactor those applications or whatever it might be. There's a myriad of things you could do.
There's a difference between seeing AI as a magic solution to your problems and then solving your problems, and then seeing AI as a force multiplier.
Yep.
That can build on those foundations to take you to the next level. And it's if you don't invest in the basics, you're done.
Thanks for watching Container Solutions TV. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on YouTube and follow Container Solutions on LinkedIn for cut down parts and weekly clips. If you want help with platform engineering, cloud native transformation, or you need to follow the money in order to change how you operate your cloud at scale, then visit our website using the links below and get in touch. We'll see you in the next episode.